I would love for Stephen King to come out with Danse Macabre 2 and fill up an entirely second book with his thoughts on where horror has come and migrated and changed in the last, God, what is that, 30 years, 40 years, however many decades it's been. I would love to see that. So call me, Steve. Let's make that happen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name's Tom Levine, and this is Stephen King's Danse Macabre, a deep dive into horror literature, episode 3. Last week, we got one paragraph into the forenote. We're going to see how much further we can get today, starting with paragraph 2. Doubleday and I came to the parting of the ways following The Stand. I bet there's a story there. And Bill also moved on. This is Bill Thompson, who edited Stephen King's first 5 books. He became the editor at Everest House, whose imprint you will find in the volume you now hold. Because we had become friends as well as colleagues over the years, let's talk about that in a minute. Over the years of our association, we stayed in touch and had the occasional lunch together and the occasional drinking bout as well. The best one was maybe during the All-Star baseball game in July of 1978, which we watched on a big screen TV over innumerable beers in an Irish pub somewhere in New York. There was a sign over the back bar which advertised an early bird happy hour, 8 to 10 a.m., with all drinks priced at 50 cents. When I asked the barkeep what sort of clientele wandered in at 8:15 a.m. for a rum Collins or a gin Ricky, he fixed me with a baleful smile, wiped his hands on his apron, and said, "College boys, like you." Which is great. So, immediately, we have to address something in here. Because we've become friends as well as colleagues over the years of our association, we stayed in touch, had the occasional lunch together. Okay, cool. That may very well happen. There's a possibility that as a traditionally published author, you may become friends with your editor or with your agent or with other people at the publishing house, and maybe even after you part ways, you'll have lunch with them, or you'll go to some Irish bar in New York and get hammered watching baseball. That's entirely possible. Son, I wouldn't bank on it. Listen, I don't care whether you're indie or trad or whichever way you're thinking about going. You can be and should be friendly and positive and upbeat and professional with your agents and with your editors. Do not ever consider them your friends unless you have parted your association, you have parted ways, and then after you have parted ways, you continue to correspond with one another or go out to eat or whatever. That's totally fine. I betcha the number of authors who can say that has happened is very, very low, like vanishingly small. Your relationship to your editor, to your agent, to everybody in the cycle is a professional relationship. Do not make the mistake of thinking that they are your friends. Again, be cordial, yes. Be professional, absolutely. Be positive, for sure. But they are not your friends. I'm so sorry if that's putting a pin in your little happy traditional balloon, but it's a fact. It's just a fact. If you go down that road thinking that they are your friends, you are only setting yourself up for heartbreak and disappointment later. Okay? Just something to think about. Let's move on. But on this November night, not long after Halloween, Bill called me and said, "Why don't you do a book about the entire horror phenomenon as you see it? Books, movies, radio, TV, the whole thing. We'll do it together if you want." That's cool. And that's something that does certainly happen from time to time. It's happened to me once already in the traditional world and several times in the independent world where an editor will reach out and say, "Hey, I've got this thing. Do you want to be a part of it?" And I think I've said yes to every opportunity, which, by the way, is another mistake. It's not a mistake to say yes to everything if everything feels good. This happened back in my theater days. It was 1999 or 2000. Somebody kind of walked into my theater company waving around a bunch of money and said, "Hey, I got a bunch of money. Why don't you go do this thing I want you to do?" And I felt like it was the worst idea ever. And of course, I said yes. And it was one of the worst ideas ever, turns out. Now, the cast and crew did great. The show was great. The experience was miserable. It was a complete misfit for our company, and I should have listened to my gut. I get I've got better about listening to my gut about these kinds of projects, but every once in a while something will show up and that fear of missing out kicks in and I just say yes automatically. And then I can't think of a time when when I ignored my gut and was wrong. Like I pretty much every time. Yeah. So these things do happen. You do occasionally get offers from editors and producers and whomever, and they want you to do some kind of collaboration, and that's cool. And you should, I think, say yes as frequently as possible. But if your gut is like, this is a bad idea, please try to listen to it. The concept carrying on with the four note, and we're about to turn a page. This is great. The concept intrigued and frightened me at the same time. Intrigued because I'd been asked time and time again why I write that stuff, why people want to read it or go to the flicks to see it. The paradox seeming to be, why are people willing to pay good money to be made extremely uncomfortable? Great question. I had spoken to enough groups on the subject and written enough words on the subject, including a rather lengthy foreword to my collection of short stories, Night Shift, which I recommend, by the way, to make the idea of a final statement on the subject an attractive one. Forever after, I thought I could choke off the subject by saying, if you want to know what I think about horror, there's this book I wrote on the subject. Read that. It's my final statement on the clockwork of the horror tale. It is 2024, coming up on 2025, which is going to be a big year for the world, I think, as we all know. And this was, what did I say, 1981, I think, when this edition came out of Danse Macabre. I would love for Stephen King to come out with Danse Macabre 2 and fill up an entirely second book with his thoughts on where horror has come and migrated and changed in the last, God, what is that, 30 years, 40 years, however many decades it's been. I would love to see that. So call me, Steve. Let's make that happen. It frightened me because I could see the work stretching out over years, decades, centuries. If one were to begin with the Grendel and Grendel's mom and work up from there, even the Reader's Digest condensed book version would encompass 4 volumes. He's absolutely right about that. I think I made this point in episode 1. Horror goes back to our language starting. It's been part of humanity's existence and storytelling since we were able to tell each other stories. So I completely agree with this. It would just be endless. And I'm sure some people have tried. There's probably too much, and so what you have to do, what editors and writers frequently do, is they'll just truncate down or drill down into one particular topic, like monsters or universal movie monsters or folklore or horror of the last century or whatever. I've mentioned Mother Horror before. Well worth picking up. Her book, 101 Books to Read Before You're Murdered, is a great example of, listen, here are over 100 books that meet a certain criteria and fit into certain categories that you really should read if you are a fan of the genre. I haven't even, I've started, but man, it is not easy to work through those books. But anyhow, Bill's counter was that I should restrict myself to the last 30 years or so. That's a good idea. See, that just, as we just said, very good. Drill down. With a few side trips to explore the roots of the genre. I told him I would think about it, and I did. I thought about it hard and long. I had never attempted a book-length nonfiction project, and the idea was intimidating. So let's stop there for a second. Never forget, Stephen King. I don't know if it still happens, but there was a time when he got intimidated by things. So you're in good company. The thought of having to tell the truth was intimidating. Ooh, that's a great line. The thought of having to tell the truth was intimidating. Fiction, after all, is lies and more lies. I don't believe he really believes that anymore, by the way. There was a book I read many years ago I think it was called The Black Box. I think that's what it was called. And there was an afterword in which the author said, good fiction has never lied to me. And that one sentence has stuck with me for years and years because I think it's true. It's a little hard to unpack. It's a little esoteric, but I think those of you who are readers, regardless of your genre, if you read fiction and I say to you, good fiction has never lied to me, I have a feeling you know exactly what I mean. People a lot smarter than me can figure out how to unpack that. Fiction, after all, is lies and more lies, which is why the Puritans could never really get behind it and go with the flow. In a work of fiction, If you get stuck, you can always just make something up or back up a few pages and change something around. With nonfiction, there's all that bothersome business of making sure your facts are straight, that the dates jibe, that the names are spelled right, and worst of all, it means being out front. A novelist, after all, is a hidden creature. Totally true. Unlike the musician or the actor, he may pass on any street unremarked. His Punch and Judy creations strut across the stage while he himself remains unseen. The writer of nonfiction is all too visible. Totally agree with that assessment. I think that's still true today. It's maybe a little less true now with social media and the internet and the focus on, what's your brand and all that kind of stuff. It is really hard to be out there creating fiction and, for example, not have a social media presence of some kind. I hear about it from students, young and old, all the time. And I'm like, yeah, I don't like it either, but it's kind of this necessary evil. I don't know how effective it is. I think it can be effective, social media and being on social media, certainly. And there are people who've made it work for them. There are lots of authors who jumped into it headlong and made the most of it, and it has really enhanced their careers. I am not one of those people, despite several attempts. In my case, consistency is probably one of the biggest issues I face, which is one of the reasons I'm doing this particular show, trying to get a series and develop it over the course of time and find an audience that way. But it's not my preference. If I was 13, I'd be having a ball. If I was 13 or 14 right now, I would probably be making so much goddamn money because all I would be doing is being on social media all day long. I would be doing nothing but making videos and writing and telling stories 24/7. But I'm not 13 or 14, so I have to make something else work. Okay, let's do just a little bit more. See where we end up. All too visible. Still, the idea had its attractions. I began to understand how the loonies who preach in Hyde Park, the nutters, as our British cousins call them, must feel as they drag their soapboxes into position and prepare to mount them. I thought of having pages and pages in which to ride all my hobby horses. And to be paid for it, he cried, rubbing his hands together and cackling madly. I thought of a lit class I would be teaching the following semester, titled Themes in Supernatural Literature. Interesting. But most of all, I thought that there was an opportunity to talk about a genre I love, an opportunity few plain writers of popular fiction are ever offered. I want to stop there and point out this is 5 books in, you guys. He's 5 books in, and he's teaching a lit class entitled Themes in Supernatural Literature. First of all, I want to take that course. Who here wants to take Themes in Supernatural Literature from Stephen King? That would be badass. But, yeah, he's still teaching. 5 traditional novels in, including like The Stand and Salem's Lot and all this, and he's still teaching. Let that sink in for a moment, authors, and embrace, if you will, the necessity, even after Stephen fucking King has published 5 novels and is still teaching a class. Now, maybe he's just doing it for shits and giggles. Probably it's fun. Obviously, I've done the same thing. It's like, ooh, that sounds like fun. I'm going to go do it. My guess is, though, he probably still has to teach. In order to make all the ends meet together, even after 5 novels, he probably is taking this gig because, yes, it would be fun, and yes, they're probably going to pay him. And he just made a joke about it for Danse Macabre. And to be paid for it, he cried, rubbing his hands together and cackling madly. This is, dude, written by an author who is counting his money because you have to. This is a guy who came from, lower middle class, to say the least, from what I remember of on writing and his biography on writing. And he's been paid some decent money for paperback rights, I think, at this point, to carry. And yet, this sounds to me like somebody, like a fairly young author, wondering, when is it all going to go away? When am I going to go back to teaching high school? And that is a tension that most of us, the vast majority of us, live with. Again, he's a young author at this point, fairly young, wondering I'm guessing, I don't know, we haven't spoken recently. Okay, for clarity, we've never spoken, just so that I say that on the record. But my guess is, my feeling is, this is a young author who's counting his pennies and wondering, when does the other shoe drop? That is the kind of thing I know it's hard to think about now, and it's a shitty, shitty feeling. I don't want you to think about it. I don't want you to dwell on it. But I do need you to know that it's probably coming, and you need to know it so that you can hopefully start getting the processes in place to deal with it when it happens, because it just hovers over you. I'm going to guess for most authors, the bulk of their career, until you've reached a certain threshold where you have X amount of money and you've invested it well and you don't technically have to work again, then this is the thing that hovers over you. And it is damaging. I guess leave it at that. Maybe we can come back and talk about that some more next week or something. I don't know, but just something to think about. I'm reading, obviously, very much into what he wrote. And again, this is decades ago. But I feel like between what I just read you on writing and just things that I've seen online, interviews and whatnot, I feel like I'm probably in the ballpark. Don't know. You can make up your own mind. And, if Steve wants to let me know and correct me that, oh no, I was in great shape, cool, happy to be corrected. But that's my guess about what was going on then. Anyhow, that's our mark for the day. So we'll come back next week with the themes in supernatural literature course and see. He's going to talk a little bit about that, and we'll have to jump into that. Man, that would be a fun course to take, though, wouldn't it? That'd be so cool. Anyhow, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you being here. And for more on me and my horror, just put my name into Google. As long as you spell my name right, you'll find me. I'm out there everywhere, or I probably have some links down in the comments or whatever is below this. I don't know. Anyway, take care and keep reading. Have fun.